Hey there, I'm Taz Singh, and I've been working with communities for as long as I can remember. Fundamentally, communities are made up of people, so this is my journey going to those communities and talking to those people. Come along with me.
Amazing. I'm back, and I'm here with Andrew Clark. So I've met Andrew recently. I've gotten to know him also through my other buddy, Ricky, who I've talked about a few times on the channel now. That guy, I got to get that guy on the channel sometime. I got to get Ricky on this. But anyway, Andrew, he works over at Meta. He's on the Facebook. Well, I guess Meta now, the Meta
I think technically in the org chart, I'm still in the Facebook. Or I don't know. I don't get it.
But I've been following kind of Andrew and his kind of career for a little while now, and so I'm a pleasure to kind of finally talk to Andrew, and especially get Andrew on here for all of you. So without further ado, Andrew Clark. So I guess we were talking a little bit just now about how you kind of started in your whole journey. So I guess now people might know you from kind of React and the stuff you're doing in the React space, but like you didn't start with React. I mean, React wasn't even out when you started programming. So like how did you even start? And how did you even get to where you are now?
Well, yeah, sort of. I guess it's hard for me it's weird to hear you say that, because I think of React still as being a pretty new thing. So it's not that weird that I started programming before it, but I guess there are probably tons of people here who became programmers in the last few years.
It's crazy because like these days I talk to tons of developers and they're like and they are a React developer. You know, like what they know is React. They started with React. That's what they know. They learned JavaScript second. They learned React first, they learned JavaScript second, and then they learned kind of the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, that order makes a ton of sense to me, but it's hard for me to even comprehend it on some level, because I do have memories from before React, but not that many. So to answer your question, I guess I've been programming for about 10 years, but I've been in web dev for longer than that. So I maybe my very first web page, let's say, when I was like in 4th or 5th grade. So that was probably my foray into the industry. And then throughout like middle and high school, I got into, some basic web dev stuff. I would make like WordPress sites for my friends or for like, the school newspaper and stuff like that. Nothing super sophisticated. It wasn't even like in my mind as a possible career option at that point. It was just a thing I knew I kind of enjoyed, and but I didn't take it seriously as the thing I would do for my career. The next maybe inciting spark for me was the iPhone that came out when I was just entering high school, 2007, and that was the first moment where like, aha, an app developer, that's a thing that I could imagine doing. And apparently like web programming is not it's like at least in the same realm as that, so I could see myself being good at that.
I don't know, like in my opinion, like Objective-C is the most subjective thing there is. You know what I mean? It's just such an annoying programming language. Like for me, I've always kind of like hated JavaScript. I love JavaScript, but I also hate JavaScript. It's a very love-hate relationship with JavaScript for me.
Yeah.
With Objective-C, I never liked that language, and so
arguably that was the very first, if you don't count like the little bit of JavaScript that I had sprinkled throughout some of my projects, like Objective-C was my first language, and I agree it's probably not an amazing first language to learn. Like all languages have their pros and cons in terms of their suitability to newcomers. I think JavaScript and Python are really good languages to learn. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that. Objective-C, though, despite not being an expert in learning, like how to teach people CS, I would agree that Objective-C is probably not the best first language. But I will say, mercifully, I started like the year after automatic reference counting became a thing. So at least I didn't need to learn like the retain and release stuff, because that probably would have like, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have even gotten through that first iOS app that I made if I had to also wrap my mind around, managing memory and stuff.
Like in my opinion, you probably would, because you're dedicated and you're kind of curious and you want to explore the craft and all that. But no, I can totally relate to like what you're saying about manual memory management. I used to do C++ video games, and that must, if I look back at my code today, I'm sure I must have been like, wow, that leaked memory like a sieve, and like I have no idea how any computer didn't just crash and die when I'm trying to play my video game. You know? And so it's crazy to think like back then we didn't have things like automatic reference counting. We didn't have things like a JavaScript virtual machine to like just automatically garbage collect. We don't have to think about that at all. And so all these things just made programming more accessible, really, to like newer generations. Essentially, what you're saying, yeah. Yeah,
and I do wonder. I'm curious your perspective on this, because like it's nice I didn't have to think about memory management back then, but also it meant I had very little idea of how even garbage collection, just because it was a thing I took for granted. I didn't even know what garbage collection meant for years, because it was just, that's the way the world works. Like I took for granted that there's some system behind the scenes that's cleaning up all of my little unused objects. And so like, for example, like a few years ago when I first started getting into Rust, I mean, by that point, I was more aware of like what a memory leak is and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But Rust is a really cool language, but it's really, if you go through a lot of the documentation, maybe it's gotten better since then, but at the time it was very much written, in my opinion, for someone who would come from like a C++ background, like had come from a language where they were forced to think about memory and pointers and dereferencing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so coming from JavaScript instead, which is like 99% of my programming experiences in that language, there was a little bit more of a learning curve. Honestly, like if I didn't, the main reason I'm able to understand Rust really is from working on something like React, which despite being written in JavaScript is very much like in the space of like a kind of like a virtual machine or like a language runtime.
Yeah. And I guess a segue onto that a little bit. Like oftentimes when I look at React, it appears to me like it is a language. It is, a language in and of itself. I mean, back when I started with React, it was React.create class, and you kind of, built like kind of an object definition inside this create class and kind of created a React component for you. That moved to like ES6 classes, and now it's obviously just a function. And that function has hooks, and like that's a whole kind of paradigm in and of itself. I think you mentioned you started with React way back. If I can tell a quick story, actually. Like for me, I go to a lot of conferences, I talk to a lot of people. I went to JSConf US when React was announced. I'm not sure if you heard that story.
I was not really paying attention at that stage.
I'm not sure if you heard that story, but it was horrible, horrible, because basically the Facebook team, they went up on stage and they were so proud of like React. They're like, guys, we figured it out. We've solved front-end web dev. You don't have to do all of this two-way data binding, do any of this anymore. But the thing that they focused on was JSX.
Yeah.
They focused on JSX for their whole talk, and for us as web devs, we were so conditioned to keep your HTML separate from your CSS, separate from your JavaScript, that when the Facebook team working on React went up on stage and said, actually, we're going to put the HTML in your JavaScript, we're just like, no, that's bad. That is bad. But it was kind of pushing the boundaries, testing the paradigm, and kind of figuring out new ways for it to work. Since then, people went and physically tried it, and actually it ended up being obviously amazing, and that's obviously why we're here today, essentially at Reactathon over in Berkeley. But it kind of shows you that it was just a whole new paradigm, a whole new way of thinking about things, and that's kind of what I've seen with React throughout all those years. You mentioned you started with React like maybe just after that initial announcement, way back in the early days. So like I'm curious what it was like for you.
Yeah, so I didn't have a lot of the baggage that you're. So I didn't watch that talk originally. I've seen it since then, but I'm fairly familiar with that initial story, like how much it bombed initially. It's interesting because internally at Facebook, before it was open source, Facebook and front-end engineers at the time were coming from a completely different perspective, where at Facebook, Facebook is, to this day, well, we use React a lot more, obviously, but to this day, it is the web layer is hack-based, which is PHP. It's PHP-based. So, and there's a framework at Facebook for on the PHP layer. I think it is technically open source, but I don't know if it ever got significant usage outside of Facebook. Called XHP. Okay. This is basically like XML syntax inside of your PHP views. That let you define HTML-based components and compose them and, pass data through them. Basic,
This sounds very familiar,
very
Andrew.
familiar, yeah. Every once in a while, like people call like Remix or Next.js, they're bringing, PHP back into vogue or whatever. But I mean, it's a joke, but it's really not a joke. Like a lot of the React programming model and like thinking was very heavily influenced by PHP. That's not the only place they came from. So Jordan Walke originally created React, and in the very early prototypes, JSX was a late addition relative to some of the other things we consider as being like key to the React model. It used to look maybe a little bit more like Swift UI or something like that, where there's not like dedicated syntax for. It was just normal function calls. And some of you may even remember that JSX used to not be like. Nowadays, if you use React without JSX, you're a little bit weird. But back in the day, it was more of, because it was a little bit controversial, it was kind of a bolt-on option that you could, if you feel like adding. Also back then, it was before Babel and before a lot of teams had really started putting any kind of build step in between their JavaScript and shipping it to their customer. Maybe a minifier if you're like super fancy. So yeah, it was a little more controversial back then. But yeah, nowadays it's a little less weird. Like things like Svelte exist, things like Vue exist. That there are React is less of a odd duckling in that sense.
So I find that interesting. So the JSX in React kind of is inspired by what, like I think you said XRP?
XHP is what it was called.
It's basically XHP from the PHP hack side, and that's kind of how they built kind of server-side UIs at Facebook.
Well, yeah, just to complete that story real quick, it was, since I got sidetracked by 10 other thoughts, it was a late addition, and I think even Jordan was maybe resistant to adding this at first, but it was a way to convince the front-end developers at the time who were familiar with XHP that this new thing was
interesting.
Like it made it more palatable to them.
So like
it's the complete opposite of the external reaction to this.
It was a bit more of like how do we get buy-in from the internal Facebook engineers?
Right. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
So the pitch internally was, and again, I wasn't there at the time. This is all secondhand information that's been passed down to me. But the pitch internally was something like, look how, you love SHP so much. What if you could write SHP in your JavaScript?
Interesting.
Because I have the same like nice programming model of writing server-side views where you don't have to worry about like state and all of that.
So that's
and bring it to the client.
That's fascinating to me. Okay, like I didn't know any of this. Like essentially, we booed them off stage at JSConf. So and here we are today. We were all clearly massively wrong. Okay, so that's fascinating. So basically, the JSX component of React, I can't say component. The JSX portion of React was kind of inspired by XHP from the PHP side, but then you kind of like went through multiple different iterations on the component like definition as well, like React.create class, ES6 classes, obviously now functions, and functions that have hooks inside of them. That's kind of an exploration of, in my opinion, of kind of programming language definition, and that's kind of a whole thing in and of itself. I'm curious, kind of like what the exploration there was.
Yeah. So we did like the original way to write React components was like class based, and that was kind of that's kind of a mind trick, like because React from the very beginning was heavily inspired by like functional programming principles. So Jordan. If you look at some of the really old like prototypes and ideas he had, it was from that world, from like the OCaml world of everything is a projection of data into some other form. Like I think render used to be called. I'm so embarrassed that I forget this. It used to be. There's a tweet somewhere. It used to be called project or transform or something like that. Something a little bit more CS-y before it was called render. Because that's what it is you're taking your props and you're transforming it you're projecting it into a different
it's kind of like a reduction in a way.
Yeah, so kind of similar. So the whole class thing, like they were classes, but we didn't actually use any of the features of classes. It was just a familiar API that people could latch onto.
Interesting.
And then of course again, this is before my time, but they added like lifecycle hooks, so those are kind of classy, and you had this dot props. But if you ever looked at the implementation of like what was going on behind the scenes, it wasn't really taking advantage of. It was just a nice familiar syntax to give developers.
It was a nice like interface to allow developers to kind of like a familiar interface for them to kind of program within.
So they open it up and they're like, oh, I know what this is, or like this isn't too foreign. Like if we right out of the gate, if hooks were right out of the gate, like who knows if React would have gotten as popular as it would have.
I mean, like hooks were controversial. I mean,
they're still kind of controversial.
It still is controversial to your point. I mean, like I remember like essentially looking at hooks, but like before it was announced, and it was I looked at it, and I'm just like, what? You know what I mean? Because like, I mean, obviously the announcement had so much more kind of background information on hooks that like it made me appreciate it more. But just looking at hooks raw without any sort of context or any sort of supporting information, you kind of look at it and you're like, what are these guys thinking? Because like just knowing how JavaScript works, you're like, you gotta, okay, like order must matter. You can't like how are you keeping track of these things? Like how are you cleaning up after these things? Like, you know, like through my head, I'm just like, I have so many kind of thoughts and concerns that before the actual official announcement that helped clarify a lot of those concerns. I was thinking you guys are crazy. I was like, this must be an April Fool's joke or something, because like there's no way they're going with this. But I kind of connect the dots there. So classes were a more approachable interface for developers to kind of build React components, and then it sounds like kind of functional hook-based component definitions. That's a bit more natural. Is that a bit more fitting with kind of the React kind of functional style?
It came from several different influences. One was, I don't know how many people will remember the days of higher order components.
I do.
But it used to be quite tricky before hooks, there wasn't an obvious way to create abstractions around reusable bits of logic that didn't directly map to UI, you know? Like nowadays you can build a hook like use query. Use query is not tied to any particular UI, right? It just returns you some data.
Yeah.
Before hooks, it was not obvious in the component like world how you would do that. There was like a once upon a time a thing called mixins that were eventually deprecated, but those were nice, but they were hard to compose. They weren't. They didn't have the nice composition model that components has. So for a while, the way to do this, there's like maybe a 2-year period where the thing that was really in vogue was you would create a component that exists not to create any kind of UI, but just to like give you some additional. You should just Google the word higher order component if you're not sure what I'm describing, because it's a little bit hard to describe verbally, but it was a way to just give you some additional data. And it was just a pattern, by the way. It was not like a first-class API that React supported. It was just a pattern of defining components that exist just to pass on additional props to the child components.
Yeah.
And sort of like how a context provider doesn't exist really to inject any UI. It's just to get pass data down to something lower.
Just to make it, just to provide it.
So if you've ever seen like the issue, or one of the issues was, if you've ever seen like a giant tree of like 10 context providers like right next to each other, it was even worse back in the higher order components days, because you'd have these giant trees of like, 20 higher order components that were just like adding like one extra prop every single time you went down a layer. So that was one of the influences behind.
It sounds like it's not very performant either, because I mean there's
runtime overhead involved as well. So that was one of the kind of the mixing pot of melting pot of influences that eventually led to hooks. Another one was, and then just to square that circle, or just to complete that circle real quick. The thing with hooks that's really nice is you can compose them the same way you can compose components, but you don't have to add another layer to the UI every single time. Every single time you use them. Another one of the influences was, we knew functional components were like in a lot of ways a more natural way to write React code. It like just fits the conceptual model a lot better than classes do. You don't have to worry about like what this.props refers to. Like back in the day, like if depending on which lifecycle method you're in, this.props could mean a completely different thing. It can mean like the previous props, could mean the next props. That was a little awkward. And so we knew just functional components were a better fit, and we knew we wanted some way to add state to these things. It just felt like the right direction to go in, but we didn't quite know for a while like what that would look like. We used to just say, well, one day we'll have stateful functional components, and who knows what that'll look like. And Sebastian, who's our tech lead for React, he had the idea for hooks, which is that what if you could hook it? He didn't say it this way at the time, but what if you could hook into state inside of your functional components and just use it the way you would use, like once you get access to it, you can use it like you would any other prop. So that's where that came from. The trick was the extra bit of insight, though, that I think like really made it work, and this is testament to Seb's genius in that knowing that that this would be viable, despite how weird it is use the use convention, the use whatever convention. It's just bizarre. Like it's not. It doesn't seem like something until like nowadays we take it for granted. It doesn't seem like something that should work. It seems like it's too weird. It's not idiomatic JavaScript.
Like you're relying on the programmer a lot. To kind of follow that convention, and like now I mean obviously there's basically ESLint, linters and stuff to like kind of enforce that. But I mean like conceptually,
the concept makes a lot of sense. At least we think it makes a lot of sense. But the exact way you have to implement it in a language like JavaScript that was not designed for this pattern it takes like a little bit of a leap to similar to the original JSX leap to say like this is something people will get over and appreciate despite kind of the initial oddness of it, which I think largely was proven to be true. Another one that still is kind of controversial is like having to pass dependencies to our hooks that accept closures. Ideally, and this is, if you've seen the React Forget talk at ReactConf, we would like that not to be required. We would like you to not have to think about manually specifying which things your closures close over. But we're like, you know what, despite this extra foot gun, we think that the concept is strong enough that people will put up with the and then of course we have an ESLint plugin that just kind of does that for you.
That kind of helps you with all those things.
So that's been very inspiring to like work on a team that's like not afraid to do some weird things sometimes if the underlying idea is something that we believe in the principles behind it and that we can like justify despite whatever misgivings people's initial reaction might be.
100%. I mean, like, and I think that's one of the reasons why I appreciate, React and the React core team is that like they are pushing those boundaries, and like no matter what, they will continue to push those boundaries in a way that like essentially I eventually come around to. And so initially I'm like, but eventually I'll come around to them. But you mentioned OCaml in there, and so I mean, essentially when I look at hooks. It is reminiscent of OCaml and kind of a way to kind of write essentially delimited continuations and stuff like that in OCaml in Reason like a little bit. Essentially, if you're kind of like squinting your eyes and kind of looking at it from a distance, it kind of looks kind of similar. And so like for me, it's kind of interesting that like essentially XHP from the hack space influenced JSX. OCaml in a way has seemed to influence kind of the hooks paradigm. I'm not sure if that's fair or true or not. But it continues to make me think of React as a runtime, React as a VM, React as an engine in a way, where I know that essentially you spent a lot of time also building concurrency and scheduling into that React runtime, and that's again system primitives. Going back to talking about memory leaks and managing concurrency on like a Rust or like a C or like an Objective C. All of that's kind of encapsulated now within React. Is that the same way that you think about things? That's the same way that the React team. Yeah. I
mean, technically, the team that I'm on now, it's not a perfect name, but if you look at the org chart at Meta right now, the team that I'm on is the React Runtime team.
Oh, okay.
Like the idea is eventually we'll also have like a React like programming model team. That's basically what our team is, though. It's the React kind of. We think of it as a programming, if not literally a language, a programming model that we're building. Because the features that we build, like Swift UI is a thing, right? We're very much in that space of programming language design and thinking, even if we don't literally have our own programming language, which maybe one day we will. Who knows? Things like hooks definitely is super influential. Things like OCaml is definitely one of the many influences that have influenced the design of React. In fact, have you ever heard of a project called React Fiber? That was the code name for a rewrite we did. It was actually the original thing that brought me onto the React team was Sebastian, about 6 years ago, started a rewrite of the React reconciler. That's what we call the runtime.
It's been 6 years now.
Yeah, it's 2016.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
time
2016.
flies. Wow.
That was the original thing that kind of got me to join the team. Was he was rewriting React, and the project was called React Fiber, and the word fiber comes from like a computer science like primitive, like an async primitive for building delimited continuations and algebraic effects. It comes from the OCaml world.
Algebraic effects, that was the word I was thinking about. Yeah.
So we definitely think that way. And it's not like a one-to-one port of any particular implementation that
At the end of the day, like,
existed,
you can't really port it because I mean the JavaScript runtime is fundamentally different, and so you need like you take the concept and you adapt it and you apply it, which is what you've done.
Yeah, but so the way that React is built in React 18, especially now, because everything that I've worked on in the last 6 years, I guess is what the number is, has been building up to React 18, which we released a few weeks ago. And as you said, like the main capability that React has today that it didn't have before React 18 is concurrent rendering. And to build a concurrent rendering engine or a concurrent rendering architecture in a language like JavaScript and in a runtime environment like the browser, it's not a natural fit. Like it'd be a lot nicer if we could use a language like Rust, because that's what Rust is really good at, right? Is like building concurrent programs.
Yeah, and Rust has native threads.
Yeah, and Rust
as
has
well,
actual native threads, which we don't have in JavaScript.
Yeah.
So we have concurrency, but it's single-threaded concurrency. But even to implement single-threaded concurrency, it's very difficult in JavaScript because you don't have another thread that you can just offload work on. You have to use time slicing, which means it has so many downstream implications. Because we have to time slice everything, we can't use like regular JavaScript function calls. You know, we can't take advantage of the program stack. You know, because we're just constantly exiting the stack so that we can yield to the browser to do event. So that just has a massive impact on literally the entire runtime. And so if you look at any React internal code, it looks very much, it's written all in JavaScript, but it looks a lot more like a C code base or like a C++ code base in terms of like the types of abstractions we use, which is very little, and the types of patterns we use and like the low levelness of everything.
I remember I attempted to use Suspense back when it was very first released, primarily for essentially code splitting, and I attempted to use it to kind of like shimmy into that in order to do data fetching back then as well, because I just wanted it. And so back then, like I had to like dive into the React code base to kind of figure out kind of how those internals worked, and I know exactly what you mean. I mean, like it's like fibers that are tagged with like a bit code or something, and then that's scheduled, and then like those obviously I can't explain it to the level that you can, but I remember like diving into it, and I was like, okay, what is going on here? Because in a way, my perception of it was kind of decoupled, like I think like purposefully decoupled, like you have kind of the execution like fibers, and then you have kind of the thing that executes it, and like it was difficult for me to follow because like they weren't like directly linked in code in a manner that I'd be used to, and so just all to say that I can verify what he's saying is true. Anyway.
It's split into multiple phases. So like because so concurrency is a large word. Like it's a pretty abstract concept maybe to folks who haven't had experience building a concurrent program. But essentially what it means is in React 18, rendering is interruptible. Like you can start rendering, get a more important input event while you're in the middle of a giant render, and switch to doing that other thing instead. So rendering is interruptible. And if it's interruptible, it means that you have to deal with things like only half of your UI or half of the components in your UI have had a chance to evaluate before the whole thing gets thrown out. Which means you don't want to show half of a screen to the user. Right? So it means we don't mutate the DOM as we evaluate your components. We evaluate the components, and then at the very end, we apply all the mutations in a single transaction.
In a single transaction,
That way, if something gets interrupted, the user won't notice. So that's why it can be quite difficult to like connect this piece to that piece in our code base sometimes. Because the the phase that evaluates the components is different from the phase that actually executes all the.
Like, this is fascinating to me because I mean, at the end of the day, again, it is a runtime. It is a runtime essentially itself, and how it operates and everything fundamentally to make our jobs as developers easier is fascinating because it is truly reminiscent of any of those other runtimes we talked about, where it's doing all the hard work. You don't have to think about garbage collection. You don't have to think about like essentially interruptibility. You don't have to think about manual memory management, as we talked about before. The runtime takes care of that for you, and it kind of enables you to kind of focus on your core business logic, business problems, and kind of just building a great UI at the end of the day. And yeah, like for me, I've just been a fan of that, you know, for a long time. I was wrong at JSConf US all those years ago.
A lot of people were.
A lot of people were.
I probably would have been if I were paying attention.
But that's awesome, dude. So, I guess to rewind a little bit, you said you started working with Sebastian, like back when Fiverr was starting. But like, how did you start there? Like, how did you start working at Meta? Like, how did you start with that role?
That's a really good question. I manifested it is what happened. Like I said years ago, like before I'd moved out to the Bay Area, which is where all the React folks were based in, all the React team members were based in San Francisco Bay Area at the time. So before I had even moved out here for my first job, I think maybe my mom or my dad had asked me like, hey, you know, they were asking one of those, you know, parent questions, like in 10 years, what's your dream situation? Or like, if you could do anything. And I literally said, I want to work on the React team.
Really?
I want to.
Wow.
That's my like pie in the sky idea of like what I would like to be doing with my life. So yeah, I manifested it. That's what happened.
Oh wow!
But you know, more concretely, like I had moved out to the area. I had a job doing React dev at a company called OpenGov. I had just co-created Redux with Dan Abramoff, who I have had the joy of working with for the last, since we both joined the React team years ago.
Dan's amazing. Like essentially, I'm based out of London. Dan's also based out of London.
Oh, that's right.
And,
I forgot.
And every time I get to see Dan, he's just like one of those like really lovely people, you know what I mean? He's just a lovely person, and he's one of those gems where you never know like what someone like Dan Abramoff is going to be like in person, and then you meet him and you're like, wow, this guy's actually just such a good human. I'm looking forward to kind of seeing him when I get back to town. Yeah,
it's wild that we've been working together for that long, because like you said 6 years ago, and I know it's that long, but it doesn't feel like that. So I think when I first was thinking that I would maybe like to join the team, this is before I had met Dan, or before he had joined the team.
And you met Dan because, if I'm not mistaken, Dan at that point, you would have been in Russia, no?
I think he was. Yeah.
So you were in SF Bay Area, talking to Dan in Russia.
I think that's what
like
it was.
A 10-hour
Dan's
time zone difference,
so
a 12-hour. Okay.
To this day, like he's always online. But yeah, like I don't remember originally how we met. Like the React community was a lot smaller back then, so it was probably on Reactathon or something like that we originally met.
Through some community.
Something like that, or maybe it was on Twitter. I'm not sure. Anyway, so you know we were working on Redux together. This was 2015, and that was like the year that I started getting invited to conferences, and I would just say yes to literally every single one. Like, yes, I would love to do that. I'd say yes to like every meetup, every opportunity, just because I knew I really liked the React community and all of the contributors, and I was really excited about the space. I'm not a really great prognosticator, but I just could feel in my bones that this was not just like a good career move so much. It's a really interesting thing that I would love to work on. So I started like hitting the conference circuit, I suppose, meeting people that way. I met a lot of the at the time the React team members. So this is like Sebastian, Tom Aquino, Sophie, Alpert, folks like that who I very much admired and like looked up to as like inspiration for what I could do one day. And so I got to know them, and then eventually, like when Sebastian started working on the Fiverr rewrite, I was by that point like stalking all of the commits on the GitHub repo, and so I would ping him with questions. And I remember very clearly like the first time like a window opened for me to be a contributor was I sent Sebastian a message about like how I thought he hadn't implemented set state yet. is what
Oh,
it was.
wow.
Like this was
Okay.
very early. He had just like done the initial like architecture for how the fibers should be set up, but it didn't support updates yet. So I said like, I think this is how, like, here's my guess for how eventually set state would work. And he said, yeah, that's basically it. Would you like to submit a PR? Which to this day,
Oh, wow.
I don't know why that sounds like wild to me that he would entrust some absolute idiot. I guess he could have always just rejected the PR, but yeah, that was my first ever, like, I think maybe I'd contributed a warning message before that, but my first ever React PR was implementing set state.
Oh, wow.
Like, it's hard for new people to have that experience. So I'm very grateful I got in like right the exact moment that I could slide in.
Set state's kind of fundamental to React, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of crazy. The whole fiber rewrite, kind of implementing set state, that's really cool. So like that's how you got recognized then, and then what? Like you were working on Redux with Dan at the same time, and then I know Dan went to go like he got scooped up by Facebook, and I think then he moved to London as well.
The timing I can't remember. So I think by that point Dan was already at Facebook, and I was still at OpenGov, and I like knew the Facebook folks, and I don't remember the exact sequencing, but basically that summer we started working on fiber. Like after that one PR, like I kept kind of contributing some more stuff, and then it just became clear that I was really interested in working at Facebook, and so that later that fall I joined the team. But it was a great time to join and a perfect opportunity for me and for Dan, and Brian Vaughn at the time also joined.
Yep.
And like it was kind of like rebooting the team in a way, and that we all got to kind of learn the code base because we were building the code base together. So it was a great way for us to really take ownership of things that we might not have had the opportunity to.
That's awesome. Yeah,
if we weren't in the midst of that rewrite. So
I guess like try to work on something. Try to work on set state. Just go and try.
Just submit. Honestly, like submit PRs, like open bug reports, even if they don't get merged. You know, any help at all that you can give to maintainers, like. Honestly, here, how about this? Like, if you're looking for a way to get involved in literally any project, go through the issues page and just triage issues. That's like number one thing you could possibly do to help.
And by triage, you mean like take a look at the issue, like essentially try to replicate it.
Yeah.
Just fill out information on what you found, if you were able to replicate it or not. If you need more information from the author, like is that what you mean by triage?
Yeah, like sometimes you get bug reports that like are a little unclear, like what the actual issue is, and triaging it would, at least when I say it, what I mean is take like kind of a fuzzy, sloppy maybe bug report and turn it into a super focused reproduction case, ideally with like a code sandbox example, or a unit test would be really great too. And that helps the maintainer who has like 20,000 other things that they need to do. It helps them be able to decide if it's something that demands their immediate attention.
Right.
Sometimes it's not clear. Like someone will say they have this catastrophic bug, but then you look closer into it and it's just they made a mistake.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't seem like that big a deal, but you dig a little bit deeper and it actually is a really big deal.
Yeah.
So that type of work is like, it's less glamorous than like implementing set state for the first time, but it's very necessary. And you will get the attention of the maintainers.
Well, you'll get the attention of the maintainers, but you'll also get a level of understanding about how things work. You'll understand, okay, these are issues that I've seen. These are issues that I think I can solve. I'll get a better understanding of how these things work. Obviously, talk to the maintainers. Hopefully, they push out a fix for what you found. You can observe and study that fix, and then obviously be a part of the community as well. I mean, as Andrew said, like a big part of your career journey was being involved with the community, conferences, different meetup events, and kind of just going and hanging out at these things and kind of being involved in these things. And kind of a combination of all those things is really what got you to where you are today, it sounds like. And so, that's awesome. And so I guess I have one final question for Andrew while I have him, and this one might be a bit controversial. So I'm sorry in advance if it is. Well, we'll make sure to cut this out if he doesn't like it. He mentioned Sebastian a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna address the elephant in the room, which is Sebastian has since changed jobs to Vercel.
Yeah.
Has that impacted the React team or the React Runtime team? How does, like, essentially what's the working relationship with someone outside of, I mean, someone like Sebastian Markpage, who's very fundamental
Yeah,
to
definitely,
kind of like architecting React and all of that, like fiber and everything, as you're saying, and hopefully the future for like how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, when he told me last summer that he was going to make this change, it was like simultaneously exciting to me for various reasons. It might be surprising, but I can explain why. But also a little scary because like Sebastian is very central to how React development works. He's the tech lead in every way. And I mean, it's also just on a personal level, he's the reason I joined the team, and we've worked very closely together over the last 5-6 years. And he's got his hands in every single aspect of what we're doing. So it was a little bit scary to me, but like in a good way, because I think as much as I've enjoyed working on React at Meta, and it's been incredibly essential, like React, everything you like about React can in some way be traced back to like Facebook engineering culture and the things that like Tom Okino and Jordan Walk and Sophie Alpert like instilled in the project, and Sebastian, of course. But like I think we do like the idea of it being not just one company. You shouldn't have to work at Facebook or at Meta to be a contributor. And honestly, I don't think we're actually that gatekeepy about who contributes. It's mostly just an issue of investment. It takes a lot of investment to be a contributor to React in terms of just time.
In terms of time,
So like today we have basically like some Meta employees, and we have Sebastian, and we have another Vercel employee named Josh who works full time on React. And we would like to have more in the future. There's no like philosophical objection to that. It's just anyway. So Seb leaving made sense for a lot of reasons, but I think the main reason it will benefit the project is it will allow us to move perhaps to more, like it might be gradual, but it'll allow us to move to a more multi-company model. Maybe like Rust in the future. Maybe one day we'll have Foundation. I don't know. There are still tons of people working on React at Meta who you maybe have not even heard of. There's projects that we haven't even announced at Meta. So the center of gravity is still very much at Meta today. But Sebastian is he still attends all of our meetings. He's still very involved in I had a one-on-one with him yesterday. I've spoken to him like 5 times today over chat. So he's just as involved as he ever has been, really. He codes a little less, maybe. He's
just getting a paycheck from a different company. That's basically it.
VCs in from a different company. That might not always be the case. Like maybe in the future, like as the project grows, especially, like there'll be slightly less integration, or like slightly less of a weekly. We still communicate a lot between all of us. But at least for now, I think it's going to be it's felt roughly the same. And I'm mostly just excited to see how else we can bring in new folks as we scale the project, really, because it's like we have very big ambitions for where we want to take React in the future, and it can't be the same 5 people who are doing it. We're going to have to find a way to scale the teams, and so we're in the midst and process of doing that, and
it's
very excited about it.
Great opportunity for anyone to kind of hop in. So as you heard from Andrew, go out there, triage those issues, learn from that, send in PRs and figure it out. But that's really good and refreshing to hear that Sebastian's still involved. It's amazing to hear that you're moving to more of like a decentralized model in terms of React governance and kind of the future of React as well. I think that'll, at the end of the day, benefit everyone, benefit the community as it becomes more of a community effort, and you think of it more as a community type of ownership in a way. So that as you said is beneficial, and really it's more of a symbol of growth and kind of maturity at the end of the day, where it's only going to be even better essentially for the React team, and I guess the React Runtime team, as you mentioned, and kind of the next gen of how this team is going to enable developers everywhere. And so anyway, buddy, thanks again. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I'm glad we had a chance to meet and chat, and it was amazing hearing your story and your journey, and I hope all of you enjoyed it as well. We'll see you next time. Bye.